Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast episode. And today we're continuing in our career journeys of HR professionals. And I'm delighted that I've got Andrew Webster here today from me. He's a senior people analytics manager at Evershed Sutherland, a large law firm, very large law firm. And I'm really looking forward to understanding a different angle of HR careers here. So Andy's happily come along for us to share how you get into this area of HR. So Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
I suppose what's useful maybe is do you want to explain a little bit about what your current job role is and how long you've been in it, and then we'll go back and work through the history.
Yeah, sure. So my current role at Evershed Sutherland, as you say, senior people analytics manager. I'm responsible for the systems and the kind of reporting analytics for HR. So look after our success factors system that we use and a number of others, including Actus, of course, that we are responsible for in the team. But I was brought in, I've been at Eversheds for just coming up for 2 years now, and I was brought in specifically to kind of move us forward from a reporting and analytics perspective. Everything we've had up to date has been Excel-based, very manual, and I want to move us forward with using Power BI a lot more for automated reports that we can push out for our HR business partners and other users to access directly, but also to really provide actionable insights for the team and to be able to tell stories with the data so that they are adding value in their conversations with the businesses that they support, and to really make a difference in terms of performance and other things within the business around our people.
So it's interesting that you're explaining that, because often when if you like HR, I don't know, in fact, I don't know whether you'd consider yourself to be HR actually, but you can perhaps answer that in a moment. But often HR are criticised for not having enough sort of evidence or facts and figures, or maybe not being strategic. So really what you're talking about is they had data, but it was in Excel spreadsheets. What you're now trying to do is provide that data in a way that's easy to interrogate and to therefore be able to act on it. That's your sort of goal in terms of turning it into something, is it?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, this is the third role I've done within HR analytics, and in each of those, that's been my aim. Really, it's twofold. One is to free up the time, particularly of the HR business partner, so they can be more strategic.
Yes.
They always seem to spend too much time on administrative tasks, on just completion of requests from the business, rather than a lot of that to be taken away by the fact that they can see at any point in time the information they need to make decisions around their people. So that's part of the aim. But as I say, yeah, it's also really to kind of uncover some of those connections between different pieces of data. So we've got a strong focus on performance at the moment.
Yeah.
So being able to pull together financial information along with HR information and other information to really understand and pinpoint where there are areas we can improve and where there are features about the services that we're providing that we can further benefit from.
So are you sort of doing correlations, or are you basically getting these systems to do the correlation, or both, I suppose?
Yeah, it's doing those correlations. I've always, well, I guess one of my strengths is to join the dots between things. So it's really getting an understanding. An obvious sort of use case in HR analytics is around predicting levers. Obviously, it's a big expense to a business if we've got high turnover in any particular role. the expensive recruiting, but also that period of time when we don't have anyone in the business. So if we're able to kind of predict what is it that's driving people to leave, so you take information from exit interviews, you take performance information to see if there's been any fluctuations in the performance running up to their departure, and you can start to get a feel for the kind of people, when to look for these indicators of reduction in engagement, various different features that might say, well, actually, it's a good time for you to kind of intervene with that person and understand what their motivations are and what their expectations are to try and avoid that from happening. Although most exit interviews I've ever done would say it's pay and career progression, and we may not have a huge amount of flexibility in either of those, but it's still a good thing to understand. Particularly the connection. I remember in my last role, working for a financial services company, there was a definite drop off in performance 6 months before a decision to leave. So we were able to monitor the kind of performance levels and not just interact from you need to pull your socks up and perform better, but is there something else going on underlying that performance that we can help you with, support rather than to kind of bash in terms of performance. So that's the stuff that really gets me going, because it's about people. It's really about understanding people. I know you're from the psychology background as well, and it's getting to understand what makes people tick and really kind of get them to engage and improve, because it's their benefit and the companies as well.
I mean, that's gold dust, right? If you're actually, so you're actually having some, it's interesting you're saying that you could see that drop off, and they would say that could be multiple of causes. So, I mean, maybe that person is disengaged, so they're looking for other jobs. What came first, the whole piece of it. But the fact that you're spotting it in data, I mean, you'd hope that a line manager would be spotting it, but not necessarily, I suppose. And that's as to how connected they are with people. In terms of just, I suppose, for the benefit of the audience that are listening to this, I'm familiar with what Power BI is. It's quite a large enterprise software type thing. So could you just maybe explain what it is and how you use it? And then if there are any examples for people who are in much smaller businesses who they're in an HR department of one or two, if you've got any tips as to how you can also use analysts. I think they often find it very hard not to be transactional because you just haven't got the resource. But I'll get you to explain Power BI first, would be great.
Yeah, so Power BI is a service, I would say. It's Microsoft based, and you can connect Power BI up to any kind of data source. It's really flexible in terms of the data that you have. So that might be in an Excel spreadsheet, it might be directly in a system, or you might have a data warehouse or something. But it can even pull data in from PDF files. It's quite flexible in terms of how you get the data in. So you bring the data in, you can manipulate it. That's quite technical in terms of the querying part of it. But really what it's about is about visualizing your data. So once you've got your data into Power BI, being able to very quickly produce charts, again, a lot of flexibility around that, and particularly to be able to drill down into that data. So you may have, a typical thing, a fairly simple headcount report, but you've got different layers of organization in your business, and ability to drill down into those different parts of the business and see what headcount's looking like over time, whatever that might be. So it's really easy to kind of explore your data through and there's lots of different visualizations that are available. And the really key bit, I mean, the kind of thing that you struggle with Excel, no matter the size of your business, is that you can be looking at quite a lot of data and you want to share that with people around the business, but not all of that data is relevant. And that's difficult to control in Excel. You can do it, but nothing's ever really hidden. And if it's sensitive data, which a lot of HR data is, it kind of restricts what you can do. Where in Power BI, the end users can't get to the underlying data. And you can put permissions and access around that so that a person working in one area of the business will only see the data that's relevant for them as well. So it's really good for that kind.
And in terms of is there as I understand it, it is quite a big, powerful tool and reasonably costly. So you need to be of a size, the business size, to get the most out of it. You're thinking about it. Because I just wonder, is there an SME version, or if someone wants to do more and they haven't got that budget, or am I is there a lighter version of it?
Yes, I mean, again, I would say out of all of the kind of business intelligence tools that I've used in the past, Power BI is probably the most accessible in terms of licensing and costs.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, if you want a full sort of enterprise model, then there are definitely costs associated with that. But you can get yourself started quite quickly just with Power BI Online. It will limit how much you can share it, but you can certainly develop things in Power BI Online. And it's really good as well, particularly if you're starting out. When I started out using Power BI and didn't have the sharing, just to create it, do a snip, put it into a PowerPoint document and share it that way is quite a useful thing to do, particularly if that's the way that your colleagues in the business are used to seeing the data anyway.
Yeah.
Moving them on to go from having reports delivered in PowerPoint or whatever that might be to asking them to go into Power BI and do things themselves is a significant leap as well. So it's not just about developing, but also training the end users. So yeah, I think you can get started quite easily and just take screenshots of what you've developed and put those into other things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's worth people thinking about in that often you want to convince, if you're in HR, you want to be able to demonstrate that you're evidence based. You want to be able to show influence people of things. So for example, your point about if you could show through a visual, and it's because it's so visual, which is great, it's graphs and things like that, people get it. Then you show through a visual that if we invest in, I don't know, management training or engagement at this level, then we're likely to get this impact, isn't it? So it's a sort of tool that could, as HR professionals, allow us to be more influential, look more evidence-based if we've got those sort of tools at our fingertips.
Yes, and that's always the kind of the keystone really in terms of what I'm trying to do. It's what are those key bits of information that will really make a difference, and
Yeah.
It's, I mean, I say I've been at Eversheds for 2 years. There's still a lot I'm working on to get towards that because obviously you need reasonably good data to be able to get good insights out of it. So working with our central data analytics team to get that in a good place as well. But I've always said I've made a career out of creating really good insights out of really bad data. It doesn't have to be perfect to have something useful. Even just an insight that says, well, actually, you've only got 70% completion in your data is a useful insight. You can then go and do something about that. So, yeah, I think you can start from anywhere, really. And, a lot of other sort of services and systems that you get will have their own reporting in as well. We're having a massive push in Eversheds now with generative AI, which is really exciting in terms of how we can use that as well from a reporting analytics perspective. So it's forever moving, forever exciting.
I bet. And actually, that's where I was going to go with that just before we go back into your career background. But I mean, you said that this has been your last 3 jobs, but do you see this as an area that's grown? And then also, what is the impact of AI on something like this?
I mean, it definitely is something that's grown.
Yeah.
When I first fell, and I'll come on to that later, into HR analytics, I didn't even know it was a thing.
Yeah.
And I started talking to, joining groups on things like LinkedIn. Some of those, what started out as sort of discussion groups, have turned into businesses for those people, the likes of the AIHR, the Academy for Innovation in HR, which is very much data-based. Insight 222, a chap called David Green, very, very influential people analytics speaker that I've been sort of involved with in a way or another, for the last 10 years. And it is much bigger now. I think there are definite roles that did not exist before. I mean, people analytics manager did not exist when I started.
Yeah.
And it continues to grow. I think it's still, in some of your big multinational companies, there is a significant presence. But as you say, in a lot of medium-sized and smaller companies, this is not a thing. It's a skill that not all business partners have. I actually delivered a session for CIPD in the Midlands a few years ago, just to introduce what people analytics was, because I don't think it's still taught as part of CIPD, but it's such an important skill for anyone in HR to understand. They don't have to be an expert, but they need to understand how they can use data and evidence to support the business that they're supporting. So yeah, we've come a long way, but I think there's still a long way to go.
And so on that, so that's a nice segue into how you started out in it. So what you know, how did you get into this? So say it didn't really exist as a thing, and obviously you had found you had a natural talent for it. Tell us a little bit about your career background.
Yeah, so I'm a maths graduate, unsurprisingly perhaps.
That makes sense.
I've always loved maths, but when I finished my degree, I didn't really know what to do. In fact, as part of one of my courses in the final year, I did a survey of like 150 people that were doing maths at Liverpool University. And the first question was, well, why did you choose to do a maths degree? And they all sort of said, oh, wonderful wide opportunities, career wise that you can have with it. Then I asked, the last question was, what have you considered? And it was teaching, banking, insurance, actuarial, and one fireman. And I didn't want to go in, and I didn't want to go into finance, so I became a teacher. I did my PGCE, and I was a maths teacher for 4 years, which I really loved. And actually, a lot of what I've learned, or benefited from later in my career, particularly around how differently people learn, has been really key in my ability to explain sometimes quite complicated things to people who don't have a maths background.
Yes.
And I
And a
really
frightened
enjoyed
of it.
that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, so many people I work with, it will say, well, maths not my thing, numbers aren't my thing. And but it doesn't need to be, because if I'm doing my job properly, I'm delivering the kind of insights to you. So
Yeah.
all you have to do is contextualize that for your business. But I taught for 4 years, and in my final year of teaching, I actually moved to London. And it was just because there were an opportunity then to look for something else that I came across what was called, it's no longer called, but was the Government Operational Research Service. This is a civil service group
Yeah.
that specify in analytics. It's called data science now. It used to be called
Yes.
operational research. And I spent 12 years in the civil service in different departments, really developing my analytical skills. That's where I kind of learned, different data modeling skills and things like that. I did some absolutely fascinating pieces of work. I was in the Home Office. My first manager and I came up with a model of offending. We were able to work out that really what you get when you've been convicted, like a prison sentence, a community sentence, or a fine, has no bearing on your reoffending rate. It's actually that act of being caught and convicted that makes a criminal decide whether to give up or not. So the faster you catch and convict criminals, the
Yes.
quicker they will give up their offending. And it took 10 years, but it led to something called integrated offender management, which the police and prison service rolled out in, I guess it would have been the early 2010s. No, late 2000, well, something like that. And that was a direct result of the analysis that I'd done. And it's probably still the proudest thing I've
Yeah,
I
you
was,
must be really proud of that. That's like one of your great successes then, I imagine.
yeah,
That
yeah. It's such
yeah.
an incredible bit of analysis, and to lead something that has genuinely made a difference as well.
Yeah.
I've worked in the Department for Education as well, and yeah, it really, really interesting work. And without getting boring and sentimental, I had a relationship breakup, and I decided it was time for me to get out of London. So I took voluntary redundancy from my job in the civil service, moved back to the Midlands where I'm originally from, and was trying to find work. Didn't really know what to do. I knew it had to be analytics. I actually applied for a finance reporting role at National Grid, based in Warwick. And unknown to me, my CV was passed on from one of the hiring managers for that role to HR, because they knew they were looking for someone with an analytical background to work in HR. So I literally fell into that job. I went for an interview, spoke to the head of resourcing, and yeah, it was originally a sort of contracting role, but very quickly I was made permanent, and I was at National Grid for about 7 years in total, looking at reporting and systems, and yeah, I've never looked back there.
And then you carried on to, so it's kind of, I can see why you've got that people. You're not a kind of for a maths graduate. You're not a kind of stereotypical just pure maths, because you had this people thing as well, didn't you? With the, I suppose the teaching, the sort of that interest in offending, sort of making a difference element to what you're doing.
Yeah.
But then how different is it working for a law firm? So you've been through private, school as a teacher, and then public sector, really different. Civil service must be very different being in a large law firm like Eversheds.
Yeah, I think I've covered practically every. I haven't worked for a charity, but I think every other sector I've worked in now. I've worked for a mutual, I've worked for a shareholder-based company, I've worked for the civil service, and now I'm in a law firm. Again, a completely different business model. And that kind of partnership model where we've got something along the lines of 450 partners who own the business. It's a very different environment to the ones I've worked in before. It's a great place to work. The people are really, really good to work with. There's a huge sort of ambition in terms of growth, and it's very fast paced. But at the heart of it, it's people data, and it's data about our people, and that's the same, in every company I've worked for.
It's interesting actually, in a partnership model. I think having data is a really useful leveler, because you've got that kind of group decision making. So having something that is factual as opposed to, I don't know, emotional or relationship, I'm not political or anything, then that's got to be quite a good thing to have in a partnership organisation.
Yes, and because of that model and the decisions that need to be made about the partners and about the lawyers in particular, data is king for sure. And there's a lot of investment in data and reporting and systems. We've recently rolled out a new finance system and billing system, so clearly it's important. And to be able to provide information on our partners and our lawyers in particular that will help us to continue to grow and to develop into new areas. Yeah, it's really interesting.
And actually, I suppose we've come back sort of full circle to where you are currently, and I perhaps looping back into the question earlier, how is AI fitting into what you're doing? Because we sort of touched on that and probably didn't go in. Where do you see that taking you?
Well, we're kind of early days in terms of AI in the company as a whole. There's a big focus on it. We want to be able to all access it and use it. Obviously, there's an opportunity for us as well in terms of how we serve our clients by using AI. So, in particular, things like providing legal advice, we should be able to use AI for that. But in reporting analytics, again, this is about getting to that kind of nugget of information faster. If we've got generative AI looking at our data and it's built into things like BI, but we've not yet got access to it. But when we do, to be able to speed up that insight in particular, to be able to use AI to draw out those key bits of information, I think that'll just make it even more accessible, even faster in terms of finding those.
Do you see yourself using it on the internal data about sort of pattern internally, or more about sort of building or growing the business? Is there a sort of area where you see it's going to lend the most value?
I think it's all of them. I think there's obviously definitely a focus across the whole firm about using AI for the benefit of our clients, because that's what we're there for. But I think within what we call our sort of international operations areas across finance, IT, HR, etc., it's how we can use AI to improve our processes, to improve how we work together. I remember hearing from someone, you can split your work into hands work, head work, and heart work. And AI will not replace the head work or the heart work, but it will replace some of the hands work. And, particularly again, as we were talking about earlier on around, strategic HR business partnering. So you've got more time to do that kind of thing.
The stuff, absolutely. The valuable stuff rather than the grunt.
That's
totally.
It. And anything that we can use AI for to kind of remove that. I'm interviewing at the moment, and we've got Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, and I've been using that to compare the CVs I've been getting to the job description to help me come up with questions. That saves me a whole lot of time just in that. But yeah, I'm really interested in how we can use it to help with reporting analytics going forwards as well.
Excellent. Great. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the career pathways. We already heard the success. I think that would be quite hard to beat your success in terms of the offenders and that analysis. That's really quite powerful. Is there anything that you'd say you'd change, or a learning point that you pick from your career that you'd share?
Yes, I think it's all a bit connected to the same thing. I found out that, I mean, I must have always known, but I found out that I have an autistic spectrum condition. Used to be called Asperger's, it's not anymore. And, you know, for years when I was younger in my career, colleagues used to call me Rain Man, things like that. And I didn't really think too much about it. It's just the way I am, and you know, I'm fairly comfortable with who I am. But when the relationship I mentioned broke down, I decided to actually find out whether there was something in it. And I was fortunate to be able to get a diagnosis. So I was formally diagnosed about 2010 with this.
Gosh, reasonably late though.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you know, it's been with me my whole life, and I've got various coping strategies and masking that's been going on, you know. But I think when I found out, I think it took me a good couple of years to kind of come to terms with it and really accept that actually it gives me some of my greatest strengths, as well as
well, it's probably a superpower, particularly in this role.
That ability to join the dots, the way my brain is wired, I mean, it's fairly unique. And you know, people have always said I have this weird ability to be able to take a kind of helicopter view, but also drill down into the detail of things, which is quite rare. And I would attribute that to my Asperger's as well. But I think, as I say, just coming to terms with what that meant for me as a person, and what it meant for my career, it set me back a bit. And I think, you know, if I was to say something to myself around that time, it is just, you know, believe in yourself. And, you know, people don't need to know that how you feel about that, you know, because I think I put myself in a worse place by convincing everybody else that I wasn't good enough. And I think I found out subsequently from, you know, the wonderful people I work with that was never the case. I've always been, you know, things that because of my Asperger's I expected to be worse at. It was not the case at all. It's taken me a while to kind of come to terms with that. So I think it was a bit of a challenge to kind of work through that. But yeah, I'm really comfortable with where I am now. I think HR analytics is sort of where I want to be. It's it thrills me every day to work in it. So yeah, I think. Yeah, I would just
That's
say
a lovely thing to say. It thrills me every day. I mean, who wouldn't aspire to having a job where what you're doing, it thrills you every day? So and it's almost found you as well, in terms of, you know, you didn't know it existed, and then you sort of fall into it. It's a vocation there. But going back to your diagnosis in 2010, do you wish, if you could turn the clock back, would you, or your say message to your younger selves, would you have wanted to know earlier, or was the world not? The world's in a better place now to have diagnosis like that, is it? Or it appears to me that people are more open to the benefits and things of it.
For sure, you know, people like Chris Packham and Anne Hegarty from The Chase, you know, who've sort of come out, as you would say, and talked about their diagnosis. It's definitely improving the conversations. I've certainly not met any kind of bad actions or words, you know, against me when I talk quite openly about it. As to your question, would I wish I'd been diagnosed earlier? I think definitely not. I think of some of the things I've done in my life, and you know, probably the single most challenging thing from a personal perspective was going to university. When I went from the Midlands, where I live, to Liverpool, you know, away from my family and away from my friends for the first time, I really, really struggled. You know, brand new place, no routine, didn't know anyone. And it took me a good 6 months or so to even feel like I deserved to be there, belonged there. And, you know, various times I was ready to give up. And I'm really pleased I didn't. But I think if I had had my diagnosis before then, I wouldn't have even gone. I would have thought it was too much for me.
You would let it hold you back almost.
Yeah. And so I'm pleased I did it. I might not have gone into teaching either. You know, you know, there are things that I've done that have been the right decision, great decisions to do. that I worry I might not have done if I'd have known.
Yeah. That's good to know. And do you spot things like that in other people now, or would you see yourself as someone who could be a mentor for others in that position, or any advice to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to. I can't help myself, but sometimes you see how people act and you think, I bet they're somewhere on the spectrum, but I try not to do that. I mean, it's not my place to do that. But certainly if you know, I work with someone and they say they've got a autistic spectrum condition, yeah, absolutely. I say I'm always open about my own and the impact it had on me. Happy to, take the mickey out of myself and some of the things I've done as a result of it over my years. But um, but yeah, no, I think anyone that's got any kind of neurodiversity condition, be that autism or dyslexia or anything like that, happily to talk to them about not letting it hold you back. I've been through that period of my life where I think it did, and in a way it was a waste of time. I should have just focused on moving forwards. So if I can help anyone do that, I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, it's a great thing to be an advocate. I mean, we're nearly coming to an end, but I was just intrigued really because one of the things that came over from what you were describing was this almost it affected your self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the fact you didn't feel that you fitted in or something? So even though actually lots of people would recognise it, you've got increased skills in lots of areas, but it sounds like you didn't feel confident or in some ways.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's just me or this is another element of autism, but I always tend to focus on the negatives. So
Right.
when I initially went through my diagnosis, all the stuff that was good, I kind of already knew and therefore dismissed as not new news. So I focused on the things that I struggle with, some social interactions and learning about my kind of social battery and how to cope with that. And I remember specifically when I started at National Grid, I signed myself up for a course on stakeholder management because I was sure now, because I got autism, that I'm not very good at creating and maintaining relationships with my colleagues, because that's one of the things that you're told is difficult. So I went on this course, and one of the exercises, it was I don't think it was residential, but it was a in-person course. One of the first exercises was just to go up to the other people on the course and introduce yourself, shake your hand, say who you were, and do that around everyone. And then I didn't know this was going to happen, but then it was everybody feedback on everybody else on that introduction. And without exception, everyone in the room said how friendly and welcoming I was. And I just had not ever had that feedback before. And after worrying so much about how I come across and worrying about, networking events and going to conferences and speaking to people and worrying about how I'm going to introduce myself and try and strike up a conversation, which I still worry about today. But I now know that, as long as I smile and listen, then, I'm an approachable person and people will talk to me.
Your
It was,
interpersonal skills are as good, if not better, than many people who aren't on the neurodiverse
well,
spectrum, potentially.
that might be the case. I don't know, but no, that as I say, you kind of told things when you have the diagnosis, and you see so much of yourself in them that I think I just took it too far, and I kind of really played down some of the other strengths that I had that I didn't realize I had. And as I say, over the last 10 years or so, it's been a really good journey to kind of rediscover myself, I think.
Yeah, and self-acceptance. So I guess would that be your sort of looking back on your younger self? You wouldn't go back and earlier, but just be kinder to yourself, accept yourself for who you are, and maybe
for sure.
focus on a more balanced outlook.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think in the late noughties, I went through some pretty tough times, and suffered quite badly from depression, and it's all related with the relationship breakdown, me struggling with who I was at that time, and it's kind of normal to have those sort of periods in your life, I think, but I think I do myself down, and I think I would just say, look, you're brilliant as you are. Just accept it, and think forwards. Think about what you can do. Don't look too much about what's happened.
I love that. Be brilliant. You're brilliant as you are. As every one of our listeners out there, in every different way, we're all brilliant as we are, and it's accept us for who we are, and channel those strengths. Focus on the positives, because you're right. It is human nature often to go into the negatives, but even more so sounds like in your circumstances. So actually, have a balanced view and be positive. Focus on the positive aspects. Andy, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you so much for coming on the HR Uprising podcast and being so open and honest to be not just about your career, but about who you are. So I've no doubt that that's going to be inspiring to many of our listeners.
Well, thank you. You're welcome.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now, you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.